Yes, it's visible.
Sure. Oops, give me a moment. Yeah, all right. So let's begin with the top few things before we get started. So I'm not able to see the chat. So if there is any question, so the conveners or managers, please feel free to interrupt me. And even the participants as well, just feel free to interrupt if you have any question anytime. So yeah, let's get started with the talk. So this is a brief outline of the talk. So we'll first move towards the basic definitions, lemmas, propositions, and theorems, some basic stuff. And then we'll move towards some linear algebraic applications on graphs. Then we'll prove the 5-color theorem. And at the end, we'll do some special cases of this open problem or conjecture that I'm currently working on. And then, yeah, some things in general about commutator. So, yeah. So some things about the history. So this is the map of the city of Königsberg. As you can see, so there are these land masses and there's a river that is here. And there are these 7 bridges. This one, this, this, and this, which join these land masses. So yeah. So there was this problem that people worried about at that time. So the problem goes like this. So, is it possible to start at a landmass, move over every bridge, and then come back to the same landmass? Uh, so this problem was later solved by Euler, and the proof somewhat goes like this. It's fairly intuitive. So if suppose you're starting from a landmass, going through every other bridge, and then coming back to it, so it must be the case that whenever you enter into a landmass, you must also leave that landmass, right? So, and since every time you're using a different edge or a different bridge, so this directly implies that every landmass should have even number of bridges attached to it. But that is not true. For example, this landmass and there are only 3 bridges. So that sort of disproves this problem. But then Euler went ahead and thought about this problem. So is there a bijection between these two? For instance, if there is even number of bridges attached to every landmass, then is it possible to have such a tour or which passes through each bridge exactly once? So this is the problem that we'll look into sometime later in this talk. And with this problem, let's go ahead and define formally what a graph is. And before we start, we aren't talking about these graphs, but rather we are talking something about this. So, yeah. So formally, a graph is a pair of vertices and edges. Vertices meaning these dots, or yeah, fairly intuitive. And this edges are that which connect these vertices. So for example, this graph, which is famously known as the Peterson's graph, is a graph on 10 vertices and 15 edges. And further, we'll note by the single bars G as the size of the number of vertices, and by double bars G, the number of edges. And we typically use these letters N and M for number of vertices and edges. So, yeah. So yeah. So the vertices which are adjacent to a vertex are called its neighbors, which is denoted by N of V. For example, if you take this vertex, then it has its neighbors as this one, and this one. And anything? Yeah, fair. So the degree of a vertex is defined as the size of its neighborhood, which in this case is 3, which is true for all other vertices as well. Now we immediately see the following lemma, which is called the handshaking lemma. So it says that the summation of degree of all vertices, or the degree sum in short, is equal to twice the number of edges. To prove this, let's think about this. So let's count the number of pairs of edges and vertex such that this vertex is contained in this edge. And this we will count in 2 different ways. One way could be, let's count it with respect to the vertices. So for example, for every vertex, it will be a part of degree of V number of pairs, right? Those many edges around it. So total number of pairs would be summation over all vertices, the degree. Fairly intuitive. And the same thing if we count it with respect to the edges, then every edge is adjacent to 2 vertices, and hence the total number of such pairs is twice the number of edges. And since this total number of pairs is the same, so these two are equal, and that proves this lemma, whatever. And this proof technique of counting in 2 different ways is what we call as double counting. We'll see more of these later in the talk. Yeah. So few more definitions, fairly intuitive definitions: a walk, a path, and a cycle. A walk is, as you would expect, like there's this graph, there are these points, and there are these, let's say, roads, and you're walking on this road randomly in any fashion. You can, let's say, start at this vertex, go to this, then this, then this, then this, then you can go back to the same vertex, then do anything. Yeah, you can do anything about it. There are absolutely no restriction. A path is a walk with no repeating vertices. As in, you can go from this, then this, then this, then this, then this, but you can't go back. You can go here, but you can't go back to the same vertex. And the cycle, again, fairly intuitive. The endpoints must match. So, for example, this, and then back to the same vertex.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you please go back to the definition of a graph?
Sure.
Okay, so here E is a subset of V square. So, but then you have written small e as in like a set, but not as ordered pair.
Oh, yeah, fair. It's nice that you raised this point. So we can take these two cases, and so there's something called a directed graph
Yes,
where this edge and this edge can be considered as distinct.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
Since you have pointed this, then since it's a subset of V square, then you could also have loops and so on. But
exactly.
For the entirety of this talk, we'll restrict to simple graphs, which would mean that these edges aren't directed. Both ways are the same. Or rather, this tuple is unordered.
Okay.
And
so then technically it's like it's not a subset of I mean it is a subset of V square, but like not the entire like it can't have directed edges and all.
I mean, yeah, it technically graph can have when you talk about graphs in general, but here what we talk about is it's something called simple graph where we would restrict the edge set.
Okay, got it.
To unordered. Yeah, nice question. Yeah, so we were done with this definition of walk, path, and cycle. Coming to this definition of connectivity, so take for example this graph. Suppose you delete these. Okay, before that, so I would say that this graph is connected, which would mean that if you take any two vertices, then there is a path that is connecting them. For example, if you take this one and this one, then there is this path that joins them. So that is what is the definition of graph being connected. Now, coming to this definition of being a cut or edge cut. So assume that you're deleting these dotted edges, then the remaining graph, there is no path between this one and this one, for instance, or rather any path between a red vertex and a green vertex. So that would mean that this graph has two components. One is this red quadrilateral and this green quadrilateral, a component being a maximal connected subgraph. And these set of edges are what we call an edge cut. Similar thing extends to a vertex cuts as well. For example, if you take these three vertices and if you delete them, then this vertex cannot be joined to, or cannot be, there is no path between this vertex and any of these vertices. So these three would form a cut, a vertex cut in general. So the graph G is called a K vertex connected, or simply K connected. If you take any subset, let's say any subset of vertices with size at most less than K, then G minus X, or which should mean that deleting those vertices from the graph cannot separate the graph. If that holds true, then we say that G is K vertex connected. For example, if you take this graph and if you take two vertices, suppose these two, and you delete them, then this path still remains. So, yeah. Two vertices cannot separate this. And there's this theorem called Menger's theorem, which says that a graph G is k vertex connected if and only if every pair of vertices have k vertex disjoint paths between them. For example, if you take these two vertices, then there is this path, and this path. I should have mentioned here that vertex disjoint paths excluding the endpoints more formally. But yeah, so that three vertex disjoint paths here. And while the forward direction here is fairly non-trivial to prove, but the backward direction is quite trivial. So could you think about it? Let's give 1 minute to think about this maybe. So something along these lines, that suppose every pair of vertex have k vertex disjoint paths between them, and suppose there exists a cut, then that cut must separate two vertices. Let those vertices be these two. Now we know that there are k vertex disjoint paths between them, and there is a cut with size less than k, strictly less than k. So does that lead to some contradiction? Yeah, anyone, feel free to answer. Okay, fair. So moving ahead with the solution of this. So this direction is trivial using what is called a pigeonhole principle. If you don't know about this, just don't worry, because it's just the name that looks scary, but otherwise it's fairly intuitive. So what this says is that since there are k vertex disjoint paths between these two vertices, so suppose you take less than k vertices, so they must leave at least one path. They cannot be present on all of the paths, all of the vertex disjoint paths. Right. So for instance, in this case, there are three vertex disjoint paths, and if you take a cut with two vertices, then it must leave. So you could let's say put it in this one, and it must leave at least one of them. So yeah, that proves it. Okay. Moving ahead. A tree is defined to be a connected acyclic graph. So there are two conditions here. The graph must be connected. That is, every two vertices must be reachable from each other. And the graph must be acyclic. That means there are no cycles. Now, this is a fairly easy proposition to prove, which I'll leave it to the readers as an exercise, or rather the listeners as an exercise. The proposition goes like this. Every tree has at least one leaf. A leaf being a vertex of degree 1, for example, this one, this one, this one, so on. So, fair. Let's move on. So, a graph is called planar if there exists a drawing with vertices such that there are no crossings. A crossing is something like this over here. There are two edges which intersect but not at a vertex. That is what is called a crossing. And a key thing to note here is that we only say that there exists such a drawing. So for instance, in this graph or in this drawing of graph, there is a crossing, but the same graph can be drawn in this fashion. For example, consider this vertex to be this vertex to be this vertex to be this, and this one to be the middle one. Then you see that the set of connections or the set of edges are exactly the same. But this drawing of the graph doesn't have a crossing. So we would still say that this graph is planar because it can be drawn in a fashion that there are no crossings. While this vertex, this graph, you could, it would be interesting to argue about that this can't be drawn in a planar, in this fashion, such that there are no such crossings. Do think about it after the talk. So, yeah. Now here is a theorem about planar graphs, which you would have seen it back in your back in your school time, in the name of polyhedrons. Polyhedrons are somewhat similar to these planar graphs. So yeah, the theorem goes like this. So if G is a connected planar graph with n vertices, m edges, and L faces, then n minus m plus L equal to 2, which is the vertices minus edges plus faces equal to 2. So
I have a question regarding planar
Sure.
graphs.
Sure.
Given the rigorous definition of a graph, how can we rigorously define a planar graph? Because this seems very like hand wavy.
Right. Yeah, that is true. So to rigorously define these planarity, so to speak, then you would have to enter into topological arguments.
Okay.
Like topologically, we would define that what does it mean to be, dividing the
Right.
plane into
Okay.
regions, and what does it mean to be two regions to be connected, and so on, and then
Mhm.
faces and so on.
Okay, it actually reminds me of the Three Blue One Brown video where he challenged YouTubers to draw something on a coffee mug, but they can't actually do it because it has a hole in it.
Mhm.
Sounds kind of similar.
Yeah. That I think typically uses topology.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so we won't be diving into the topological arguments over here. So just intuitive definition of planarity. But yeah, you're right. This isn't very formal. That's true. Yeah. So let's prove something about these planar graphs. The proposition is that the planar graph with n greater than 3 vertices has at most 3n minus 6 edges. And the way we are going to prove this is that a maximal planar graph, maximal with respect to the edges, that is, if you fix this n and consider all the planar graphs with n vertices, then just pick the graph that has the maximum number of edges. And the claim is that that must be a triangulation, which means that all the faces being these ones, which do not have anything inside. So the claim is that all the faces are 3 cycles or a triangle. So let's give 30 seconds to think about this. So just think about this. What if not? What if all faces are not 3 cycles? Then there must be a 4 cycle, or no, not 4 cycle, but at least 4 cycle. So as a face. So can you do anything with that? Yeah. Anyone, just feel free to answer.
What if you have a single loose leaf somewhere?
Sorry, what?
What if you have a single unconnected node that's only connected to one other node?
Hmm.
What
I
phase does it fall into?
Oh, I see. I think you mean something like this. Oh, why is this pen not working? But fair. Okay, so I think what you meant is like suppose you have a triangle and there is just one vertex at here, which is just joined to this, right?
Right,
It,
right, right.
yeah. So that would actually fall into the outer face. As in, so the outer face would now be this, that one, again back to that, this one, and this one, and this one.
Okay.
As in, so we just traverse it in a fashion and then just come back along the same edge. So yeah, so in that case, that would be a 5 cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So did that make sense? Yeah, I should be right. So yeah, coming to the proof of this claim. So if not, then there would be a 4 cycle, or at least a 4 cycle, as in a cycle with more than or equal to 4 vertices. Then what you could do is you could just add an edge in between them. So, for instance, if you have just this 4 cycle and none of these edges, then you could just add this edge. And what you get is a planar graph that has more number of edges than this, which contradicts the maximality of it. So that implies that a maximal planar graph must be a triangulation. Now our second claim. is that a triangulation must have 3n minus 6 edges. So what do you think about this? This would follow in the same fashion as our handshaking lemma, as in double counting the number of face comma edge pairs. So think about it. Let's give 30 seconds to think about this. Okay, I hope the question is clear.
So for a cycle which has something like this where multiple faces are the same,
I'm sorry.
how can you be sure that you just showed me a 5 cycle where two of the nodes are the same, right? In the 5 cycle.
Yeah.
So how are you saying for sure that there's always another edge you can make?
So for example, if you have such a case, then we have this leaf vertex, so to speak, right? Which you could join over here or anywhere. Right, that makes sense.
Okay, but I
Yeah.
mean, okay, sure, sure.
Right. Is it fine?
Yeah.
Sorry. I think like if you're asking for a formal argument, then suppose if you have, I mean, like such edge repetitions will occur only when there is a pendant vertex or a leaf vertex, so to speak, right? With degree 1. And that can anyway be joined to the vertices of that face. And if not, then
Right.
yeah. If not, then at least a 4 cycle will satisfy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question. So any attempts on this thing? Okay. All right. Let's see the argument. So again, we'll double count the number of face comma edge pairs, similar to what we did at that time in handshaking lemma. So if we count the number of face comma edge pairs with respect to the edges, then we again get twice of number of edges, and that is because every edge is a part of two faces. So for example, this edge is a part of this one and this one. This edge will be a part of this one and the outer face, so on. And every face is a part of the number of the is a part of those many edges. That is the size of the face, right? So 2 times mod e equals summation of all the sizes of the faces. And in a triangulation, all faces have size 3. So this equals 3 times L. Now, if you plug this in the Euler's formula that we derived, not derived, but stated, so you would get n minus m plus 2m by 3 equal to 2. And when you solve this, you get m equal to 3n minus 6. So what we have proved is that a triangulation has 3n minus 6 edges. A maximal planar graph is a triangulation. So every planar graph must have at most 3n minus 6 edges. So yeah. Moving ahead. So yeah, this is the theorem that we're talking about while we're talking about the Königsberg. So let's first define what an Eulerian tour is. That's basically what we just stated intuitively at that time. So Eulerian tour is a closed walk that contains each edge exactly once. Closed walk meaning it should come back to the same vertex. Then there is another version of this problem which is called Eulerian path, and that would mean that yeah, it traverses every edge, but it need not necessarily come back to the same vertex. That is what is called an Eulerian path. Now, so this is the let's say a graph version of the Königsberg problem. And as you can see that, yeah, every vertex has an odd degree. So by this theorem meaning a connected graph has an Eulerian tour if and only if every vertex has even degree. So this Königsberg problem doesn't have an Eulerian tour. And yeah, one direction of this we have seen it while we're talking about Königsberg. That is, if a graph has an Eulerian tour, then every vertex must have even degree. Now we'll see the other way around. So let's go to the proof. So we'll use here something called proof by contradiction. Let us assume to the contrary that there is no Eulerian tour. So, and let's consider a maximal walk that has no repeating edges. So let's say it starts at some V1 and goes to V2, V3, so on, so on, so on, so on, so on, and comes back to VL. Oh no, VK. Now what we know is that this is a maximal walk, so which would mean that VK cannot be extended to any other edge that is outside W. That is, every edge of VK is already contained in W, right? And if VK is present anywhere inside the walk, by inside meaning not V1, then that would contribute 2 more edges, right? But VK has one edge over here, and the degree of VK is even by the assumption. So that would mean that VK must be equal to V1. VK must be equal to the starting vertex to preserve the evenness of its degree. Right, so basically this maximal walk must be a closed walk. And now, since the graph isn't Eulerian, so this maximal walk cannot pass through every vertex. Otherwise, that's an Eulerian tool, right? So there are some vertices which are not part of this maximal walk. And now, since the graph is connected, so some of those vertices must be conjoined, must be adjacent to this W. So there must be a vertex V, which is joined to some vertex Vi in this walk, maximal walk. But the moment we have this vertex, we can extend this walk, right? For instance, we could just start from here, then take this path and come back. So this walk has size 1 more than this walk that we talked about here. So this contradicts this maximality of this walk, and that is a contradiction. So what this means is that our assumption was false. So this graph has a Eulerian tool, as in any graph which has all vertex degrees as even, that has an Eulerian tool. And suppose if we are talking about the Eulerian path problem, then that would mean that using some similar arguments, that only the endpoints are permitted to have odd degree, while all other interior vertices must have even degree for it to have an Eulerian path. And as a fun fact, so out of these 7 bridges, so Russia destroyed 2 of the bridges, this one and this one. So it still has 2 vertices of degree 3 and 2 vertices of degree 2. So as of now, there is no Eulerian tour in the city of Königsberg, but there does exist an Eulerian path. Yeah, just a fun fact. Yeah, this is what we did just now. We use the contrary to destroy itself. Yeah. Moving ahead, so okay, yeah. Meanwhile, so are there any questions in the part that we have done so far? This part will be heavily using in the later parts. So feel free to ask. All right, fair. So let's move ahead with this. So we define, I hope everyone is comfortable with linear algebra from MA 106. So yeah. So let's define this H space. So this is a collection of all functions from the H set to this 2 element set 0, 1. And the scalars are basically 0 and 1. And the addition and all is defined as the XORs. So 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1, and so on, and 1 plus 1 is 0 plus 0. And so you can see every element of this vector space as a subset of edges, right? Like just consider this function as a selector or something. If it takes the value 1, then the edge is selected. If it takes the value 0, then the edge is rejected. So that naturally corresponds to a subset, right? Now, this vector addition in this space, since we have defined it using XORs, so this naturally corresponds to symmetric difference. So for example, if we have this red set of edges and this green set of edges, if you add them, then you get this blue set of edges, excluding these two. So this is what a symmetric difference would mean, as in all the edges that are present in exclusively one of them and not in both. So, and another easy observation is that this E1, like this singleton sets of these edges, so these form a canonical basis, and like this is what we define to be canonical basis, and thus the dimension of this edge space is m, m being the number of edges. So yeah. I hope the definition and all of the edge spaces and all is clear. If not, the later part would be tough. Feel free to ask any question about this. Okay. So now we define inner product in this space, and no surprises here. Suppose if we have two sets that can be written uniquely as a summation of these canonical bases, and the inner product is defined naturally as the summation of the products of the corresponding coefficients. And the summation is over F2. I mean my bad. F2 meaning this thing, this two element set, 0 and 1. And now observe that inner product of two sets of edges is 0 if and only if the intersection of the edges is even. And that is because if you take any two sets, then the this summation counts the total number of intersection of the total number of edges in the intersection over 0 and 1, like over the set 0 and 1, as in like 1 plus 1 corresponds to 0. And so if this summation is even, then so if the summation of zeros is even, then if the summation of intersection of the edges is even, then this inner product is 0. And now this is a fact from linear algebra that for any vector space W, its dimension plus the dimension of its perpendicular is the dimension of the vector space itself. So yeah. Now let's move ahead and define what is called a cycle space. So a cycle space is a subspace of this H space itself, which is spanned by all the cycles in G. As in, take all the cycles, take all the linear combinations, and the entire set that you get is called the cycle space. By definition itself, it's a subspace of G. And now we'll prove these following, that these following are equivalent. As in, if any set belongs to this cycle space, then F can be represented as a disjoint union of cycles. F belonging to cycle space means that F can be represented as a union of cycles. And the second thing specifically points out to disjoint, as in H disjoint union of cycles. And the third thing says that all vertex degrees of the graph G restricted to the set F are even. Now, to prove this, we'll prove that 2 implies 1, then 1 implies 3, and then 3 implies 2. That will prove this. And 2 implies 1 follows from the definition itself. First, if it's a disjoint union of cycles, then by default it's a union of cycles as well, and thus it's in cycle space. So now let's prove that 1 implies 3. So we'll prove this using induction. Consider the base cases. So take any cycle, then all vertex degrees are even. Like to be more precise, all the vertices that are present in the cycle, they would have degree 2, and all other vertices would have degree 0. So all vertex degrees are even. If you take symmetric difference of two sets of edges which satisfy this evenness of degree, as in if you take two sets which satisfy this property 3, then we are going to prove that the symmetric difference is also going to satisfy this. So for instance, so we will prove it at each vertex. So suppose these are the edges that are present in F1 or F2, and let's say this red edges and together with the blue edge are the edges that are present in F1, and this blue edge and these green edges are those present in F2. If you take the symmetric difference of it, then the total number of edges now are, or the edges now are these edges plus these edges minus twice this edge, right? Now we know that these edges are even because we have assumed that. These edges are even because we have assumed it. And since we're subtracting 2 times of the intersection, that is even as well. So this preserves the evenness of degree at each vertex. And so if you take symmetric difference of any two sets, then that also satisfies this. So by induction, it proves that for any set F in CG, then all vertex degrees are even. Now, coming to the third thing. So you remember that proposition in trees that any tree must have a leaf vertex, that is a vertex that has degree 1. Now, since we have this theorem, or like this fact about the graph, that all vertex degrees are even. So if you take the subset of degrees that are that have degrees greater than or equal to 2, then these must have a cycle, right? Because if it's acyclic, then there must be a degree. There must be a vertex with degree 1. So this has a cycle. Now let's delete this cycle, and this would divide the graph into one or more components. In this case, I have drawn 6, but it's not necessary that every vertex will have a different component. Some two may be joined. So yeah. So basically, when you delete this cycle, then you get a lot of components, and in each component, this fact holds true that F is disjoint union of cycles because of induction hypothesis. Now you can take those disjoint union of cycles and this cycle and take their union, then this is a disjoint union of cycle that forms this graph. So this completes the proof of 3 implies 2. So, yeah. So now we'll prove that that the cuts in G form a subspace, and I hope you remember the cuts in the definition. If not, let's just see an example. Suppose this is a graph, and if you take these 4 edges, then this would divide this graph into 2 sets. And so these 4 edges are what are called edge cut. And here on by cuts, we mean edge cuts. So yeah. The proposition is that the cuts in G, including the null set, forms a subspace. Now, you all know that, right? To prove that it's a subspace, then we need to prove some axioms on vector spaces, and the null space, by definition, is in the cut space. Further, by the commutativity and associativity of symmetric difference, then all other things just settle into. And we just need to prove that if D and D prime are 2 cuts, then their summation is also a cut, right? And if D equal to D prime, then the sum is phi, and the phi already belongs to the cut. So let's just assume that D not equal to D prime, and let's just say that D divides this entire graph into this red sets, and D prime divides this entire graph into these green sets. Now, so just a clarification here. So this circle here represents all the vertices that are present in V1 intersection V1 prime and so on. And this is not a single edge, but rather the set of all edges between V1 intersection V1 prime and V2 intersection V1 prime. So just to keep it in mind that these are set, not just a single edge. Yeah, anyway. So since D divides this graph into these two, so D includes this set, this diagonal sets, and this set. D prime includes this, and this. Now, if you take D plus D prime, then these are common. So these add up to 0. So D plus D prime basically is this set of edges, this set of edges, this set of edges, and this set of edges. And now you can see that these set of edges, these divide this union this, like consider this as a set, and this union this as a set. Then these set of edges partitions the graph into this one and this one. Formally, it's mentioned over here. So this just implies that D plus D prime belongs to the cut space. I hope this was clear. Okay. Fair. Now that we have shown that cycle space is a subspace, cut space is a subspace, now we'll prove that the cycle space is orthogonal to cut space. And to prove this, so we'll first prove that cycle space is a subspace of this C star perpendicular, C star perp in short. And then we'll prove that C star perp is a subset of C. So yeah, consider any cycle C in this cycle space. Now, what we have is that if you take any cut D, let's say this D cut, which divides this graph or partitions this graph into this set and this set. So if you take any cycle C, then it must cross between V1 and V2 even number of times, right? Because it has to come back to the same vertex. So for example, in this case, it goes, then comes back, then goes, then comes back, then goes, and then again comes back to the same vertex. So if you take C and any cut D and take their inner product, that must be 0 because there are even number of edges in the intersection. And so this means that this cycle is a subspace. The cycle is a the cycle is or like the cycle belongs to this C star perp, and that means that any linear combination of these cycles is also belonging to the C star perp. So cycle space itself is a subset of C star perpendicular. Right. Right. Now let's prove the other direction. So consider any set F that is not in the cycle space. Now we have seen in this proposition that if any F is belonging to the cycle space, then all vertex degrees are even. Right. So yeah, so that would imply that if all vertex degrees are even, then this F must be in cycle space, which is not the case. So there must be a vertex V of odd degree. Right. And now, if you take, so this EV is defined to be the edges that are adjacent to V. So just take this vertex and all the edges that are adjacent to it. And if you take this, so that is a cut, because if you take all the edges adjacent to V and delete them, then that just separates V from the rest of the graph. Right. So this is a cut, this belongs to the cut space. And if you take inner product of EV comma F, as we have just shown that the degree of V in F is odd, so this inner product is not 0. And this implies that F does not belong to cut space as well. So these imply that the C star perp is a subset of the cycle space, or the orthogonal space to the cut space is a subset of cycle space. And this one and this one together imply that this cycle space is equal to cut space. So, yeah. Any questions so far? Feel free to ask. So, are you with me so far, or some concepts are left behind? Anything? Just feel free to ask anything. Fair. So now let's move ahead to prove our next theorem. We'll look into something called as fundamental cycles and cuts. And yeah, at least now I would need this. Okay, fair. This is important. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So yeah, fair. So consider any spanning tree, and by spanning tree I mean a tree that has the vertex set as the entire graph G. So as in given any G, then you can get a spanning tree which spans the entire graph basically. So these black edges forms a tree, these ones, and so on. So now consider any edge in this tree. For instance, this. If you delete this, then this divides this tree into two components or two parts, which is given by this gray area and this white area. Now, if you take these two, vertices, set of vertices, and consider the cut between them, then that is what we define to be DE, or a fundamental cut with respect to this edge. Right? So such fundamental cuts exist for every edge for the tree. And now if you take the similar thing for a cycle as well. So consider any edge that is not in the tree. If, for instance, this edge. So if you add this edge, then there exists a unique cycle in the tree now. For instance, if you add this, then this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that. That is a cycle. And this unique cycle is what we call as CE, or we denote it as CE, and we call it as a fundamental cycle. And then we have fundamental cycles for every edge that is not in the tree. I mean, corresponding to every edge that is not in the tree. So is this definition clear of the fundamental cuts and fundamental cycles? Right. So moving ahead, so we are now going to prove this theorem that given any graph G and given any spanning tree, then we obtain these sets of fundamental cycles and fundamental cuts, right? So now we are going to prove that these fundamental cycles and cuts, so these form a basis for the cycle space and the cut space respectively. And this would then imply that dimension of the cycle space is n minus n plus 1 and dimension of the cut space is n minus 1. So let's see why is that true. So yeah, so suppose you have this edge and you have its fundamental cut, then it's fairly easy to see that this edge is the only edge of the tree that is present in this fundamental cut, right? Because this edge just separates this into two parts and all the edges are there in the parts itself, not in between. So, and also this edge is not part of any other fundamental cut except for its corresponding fundamental cut, right? So if you take any linear combination of fundamental cuts, then this would imply that this coefficient of this DE, coefficient of this fundamental cut must be 0, right? Because this edge is not present in any other fundamental cut. So there is no way to cancel out this edge. And the same is true for all other cuts, fundamental cuts. And so these fundamental cuts are linearly independent. Is this clear? Okay. So since these fundamental cuts are linearly independent and these are n minus 1 in number, because corresponding to every edge of the tree, then we have a fundamental cut. So dimension of the cut space must be at least n minus 1. Yeah. And the similar argument holds true for CEs as well, because this edge is the only edge that is present in this fundamental cycle, and no other edge is present in this fundamental cycle, which means that this edge is not a part of any other fundamental cycle. So even the fundamental cycles are linearly independent, and thus dimension of the cycle space is at least m minus n plus 1. Now we know that so we know that this C and C star are perpendicular to each other, or they are orthogonal complement of each other. So the sum of the dimensions must be equal to M from the theorem of linear algebra that you have seen. And from this side, this is greater than the sum of these two, M minus N plus 1 and N minus 1, which evaluates to M. So this means that equality occurs at both these places. And this means that these fundamental cuts and these fundamental cycles are maximal linearly independent sets and are thus a basis for their respective cycle spaces and cut spaces. So yeah, let's take a break for about 1 minute. Meanwhile, feel free to ask any question. And after this, we'll dive into some coloring, some interesting coloring stuff. Feel free to ask question in meanwhile. So, was it clear or fairly clear, not clear at all? Feel free to ask any question regarding the content that we have covered so far. Okay, fair. Let's move ahead with this coloring stuff. So if you haven't been with me so far, and if let's say you haven't understood the linear algebra thing very clearly, then it's fine. I mean, the linear algebra thing isn't going to be used here, so still stay along. So yeah, now let's define coloring. Let's just define vertex coloring, and the edge coloring would follow in a similar way. So given a graph GVE, again we have this Peterson's graph over here. Coloring is a map between set of all vertices to like just this set of integers or anything. Only the cardinality of it is what matters. So yeah. So let's say 1, 2, 3, so on up to 2. So if there is such a map such that all the adjacent vertices have different color, then that map is what we call a valid coloring. And if there exists such a map between V to 1 to so on up to K, then the graph is said to be K colorable. And the minimum number, the minimum such K is what is defined to be the chromatic number of the graph. And the same things follow for the edge coloring as well. And yeah, so given this graph, so this Peterson's graph, so you can see that there are just 3 blue, 4 red, and 4 green vertices, and no 2 adjacent vertex have the same color. So this is a valid coloring on Peterson's graph. Yeah. So now we'll ask this question: how many colors suffice for a planar graph? And it's a theorem, it's a known theorem that the planar graph, every planar graph is 4 colorable. That is, if you take any planar graph, this is not planar, but if you take any planar graph, then that would be 4 colorable. That is, you can color it with 4 colors. But what about the proof? So proof isn't really simple. So the way people have proved it so far, so what they do is, so they take they define a set of 1936 graphs, and what they say is that if you take any planar graph, then it must have one such case or one such configuration in it, and so that reduces any graph to just this 1936 cases, and these cases are solved using computer. This isn't the job of a human. So yeah, this is how they have proved it, and we aren't going to do it over here. So we'll prove this following weakening of this, that every planar graph is 5 colorable. So yeah, to prove this, we'll again induct on the number of vertices. Consider any graph with more than 6 vertex. The smaller case is just homework exercise or something. You can try it out, or just again, just like this, ask your computer to prove the smaller cases. And now here is the claim. So if you take any graph with more than 6 vertex, so then there any planar graph with more than 6 vertex, then there exists a vertex v such that degree of v is less than or equal to 5. So can you think about this? Let's just give 1 minute to think about this maybe. But yeah, like do try to get to the proof of this. In that way, you'll be able to appreciate more what's happening in the topic. So use that thing, like use the theorem that we have proved about planar graphs. That is, every planar graph has at most 3n minus 6 vertices. So that would bound the number of edges, upper bound the number of edges, and then use that thing. Use the handshaking lemma. That would give you the proof. So, anyone with the argument about this? Okay, fair. Okay, fair. Let's see the argument. Yeah. So, suppose not, then every vertex must have degree at least 6. If this is not true, then every vertex must have degree at least 6. So, and now this inequality is what you have proven before, that every planar graph satisfies this. Number of edges are bounded by 3n minus 6. And this equality follows from the handshaking lemma. 2 times the number of edges is the degree sum. Now, since each degree is at least 6, so this is greater than 6n. But if you evaluate this, then this evaluates to 6n minus 12, which is strictly smaller than this. So that is a contradiction. So thus we have just proven that there must be a vertex with degree at least at most 5. Yeah. Now let V be a vertex that has degree at most 5. Now let's delete this vertex. We delete this vertex as well as these edges. We have a leftover graph. By induction hypothesis, that graph is planar. Like that graph is planar, as you can see, by definition of planarity, basically. And by induction hypothesis, that graph has a valid coloring between its vertices to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. Now let's assume that these neighbors of V, so these in total use at most 4 colors. That could happen if, let's say V5 is not there, then we have only V1, V2, V3, V4, and these can use at most 4 colors. Or just 2 colors are same, and that would imply that 1 color is missing. So in that case, we could just color V with that color, and we are done. We got a valid coloring for G, and we have proven that there exists a 5 coloring for this graph, the entire graph G. Right. With me so far? Fair. So suppose this assumption is not the case, that it actually uses 5 colors, which means that all the 5 vertices are present, and so the degree is actually 5, and all the vertices have a different color. So now we define this Hij, which is the subgraphs of 2 colors. For instance, if you take this red and green color, then you can obtain the subgraph that contains subgraph of this graph G, where vertices are colored only red and green. So that would include this vertex, this vertex, this vertex, this vertex, and it would not include this one, this one, this one, and so on. So Now that subgraph is divided into many components, and there could be two cases, that this V3 is either present in this component or it is not present in this component. So let's take the first case, that V3 is not present in this component. Then that would mean that we have, so there is some component which doesn't actually extend to V3. Now what we can do is we can take this component and switch the colors, by which I mean V1 will be now colored green, this one will be now colored red, this one green, and this one red, and so on in that component. Since all this processes is happening in this component, this doesn't affect V3. V3 is still green. V1 has now become green, and the coloring is still valid because only the adjacent colors are swapped. So now since V1 is green and V3 is green, so the red color is missing among the neighbors of V, and V can be now colored red, and we're done. Right. So now let's take the other case, which means that V3 is actually in this component. So there would be some such path and as well as some other things. Now our switching argument actually doesn't work. If you just switch the colors, then V1 will become green, V3 will become red. But that doesn't really say anything. We are still in a dilemma about what to color to V. But just think about this V2 and V4. Now, the same thing must hold true for V2 and V4 as well. That is, there must be a path of colors only black and yellow that must join this V2 and V4. But such a path must intersect this path somewhere. Now, they cannot cross because that will contradict the definition of planarity. So they must intersect at some vertex. And now we are in a dilemma as to what that color that vertex has. One path says that it must be red or green. Another path says that it must be black or yellow. And the two together cannot hold. So V2 and V4 cannot lie in the same component. So they lie in different components. Now you can use the same argument. You can switch the color in this component that is V4 in, that V4 is in. And then so V4 will get the black color. Same with V2. And now this we can color it with yellow. And we're done. So this completes the proof. However, keep a keen look at this word clearly. So as one of our friends has pointed out before, so this argument are sort of intuitive arguments, not really formal arguments. As in, we haven't really formally proved that V2 and V4 actually lie in different components. And yeah, so whenever any math enthusiast uses words like clearly or it's obvious or it's easy to see that, don't trust him. Because if that were so obvious, then they would just go ahead and prove this. Like, yeah, I beg a pardon here. We aren't really going into the topological arguments, so just excuse me when I use this word clearly. Fair. So yeah, any questions on this 5-color theorem? All right then. So let's look into this conjecture or open problem. So let G be a cubic graph. By cubic, I mean that every vertex has degree 3. For example, this vertex has degree 3, this one has degree 3. This one also have degree 3, but we haven't actually shown it here. So a cubic graph where every vertex has, oh, what is this? This is a typo here. Every vertex has degree 3. So yeah, and now we define a reduction with respect to an edge E as follows. So if you take this edge E and you delete this vertex and this vertex, and you sort of merge these two edges with each other. that forms this. The rest all graph stays intact as it is. Now, it is fairly easy to see that this new graph, this reduced graph that we get, this is also cubic because the degrees are preserved at these vertices and these vertices are deleted, so we don't have to care about it anymore. And by the way, this is a single edge. Edge need not have to be a straight line. It could be any collection of arcs. Just a clarification here. So now we define the conjecture, which says that given any cubic 3-edge colorable graph, that is a cubic graph that has a 3-edge coloring, then there exists an edge E such that the corresponding reduced graph is also 3-edge colorable. I hope the statement of the conjecture is clear. If not, the rest of the talk will be gibberish for me. Yeah, fair. So now just note this, it's an easy observation that if you take any 3-edge colorable graph, a 3-edge colorable cubic graph, and if you take the subset of the graph that has just 2 colors, then that would be a disjoint union of even cycles. Why is that so? Because if you take any edge, any vertex, and let's say you take this such alternate paths of red, green, red, green, red, green, and so on, then it must come back to this vertex at some time. That would form a cycle, and then such things you can do for every other vertex, and yeah, you'll get a disjoint union of even cycles here. If you restrict the graph to 2 colors, as in take the subset of the edges that are red and green colored, and those would be a disjoint union of even cycles. So maybe, yeah, for example, take this thing, then if you just restrict it to this red green ones, then this is forms one cycle. If you restrict it to black and green, then this is a cycle and this is a cycle. So yeah, if you're thinking like, like this is a conjecture and what you're going to do with it, so of course, I mean, like, we are not going to prove this entire conjecture, but we'll only prove some special cases on it. And special cases are, in this case, are easy. So yeah. So here is this first special case, which is the Hamiltonian case. Let's first define what a Hamiltonian means. So a graph being Hamiltonian means that there exists a cycle which spans the entire vertex set. As in, there is a cycle which passes through every other vertex, every vertex, to be precise. For instance, this again, so there are these vertices, and there is this cycle which passes through all vertices. So this graph is Hamiltonian. Yeah. Now the proposition is that suppose in addition to the conditions given here, that cubic and 3-edge colorable, suppose in addition it is also given that the graph G is Hamiltonian as well, then the statement in the 3-edge coloring that holds. That is, there exists an edge, so that when you reduce it along that, then we get a 3-edge colorable graph. Now, again, we'll prove it using 2 claims. First claim is that every cubic Hamiltonian graph is 3-edge colorable. And second is that if G is a cubic Hamiltonian graph, then there exists such an edge. There exists an edge such that the corresponding reduced graph is also Hamiltonian. So let's think on this as well for a minute, maybe. Let's first think about this second claim. It's easier than the first one. So I think the statement is that suppose there is a Hamiltonian graph, then there exists an edge such that on deleting this, the remaining graph also is Hamiltonian. And this you can actually see in this figure. If you just take this edge and delete this, then the remaining graph has these 2 edges merged, These H is present, this H is present, and this forms a Hamiltonian cycle in the reduced graph. So yeah, that is the proof. Just pick any chord, a chord meaning any edge that is joining two vertices of the cycle. So pick any chord of this Hamiltonian cycle and we are done. Now think about this one, the first claim. Every cubic Hamiltonian graph is 3H colorable. So just think about this. There is a Hamiltonian cycle. So there is a cycle that passes through every vertex. Now there are chords joining in between. Is there any way you can color them? And again, this diagram would just clear it out.
The diagram makes it pretty evident actually. If like
Yeah.
the cycle which passes through each vertex, you can assign alternate colors to the adjacent edges and one color to all the chords. And
yeah, true.
That will make it.
That works. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that makes it 3H colorable, right?
Yeah. One more thing that you have to worry about here is that if you're coloring it with two colors, then that must imply that this cycle is even.
Right. Yeah.
So think about that. Why should that be true? But yeah, the argument is correct. So yeah, this actually follows from, the hand shaking lemma. Twice the number of edges is the sum of all degree sum, and since degree of every vertex is 3, so twice m is equal to 3 times n. I think I'll have that somewhere. Yeah. So twice the number of vertices, twice the number of edges is 3 times the number of vertices, and this implies that the number of vertex is even. So
yeah, right. I didn't consider that. Yeah, I should have said that first. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's fine. So yeah, so this proves this claim, and this finishes this special case. So now let's just look at this colorings again. So can we obtain the coloring of this reduced graph in some way in terms of the coloring of this graph? For instance, when we are deleting this edge and we are aiming to merge these two edges, what we basically want is that these two edges must have the same color so that we can just merge them, right? Same for these two. So if magically I can convert this into red and convert this into green, then I can just obtain a coloring for the reduced graph, right? And when would that be true? That would be true if that like this edge and this edge lie in the same cycle, the same two colored cycle. Then what we can do is, again, like we can swap the colors. So this green one becomes red, this red one becomes green, this green one becomes red, this red one becomes green. Now these end colors match, so we can merge them, and we obtain a valid 3H coloring for the reduced graph. Right. But think again, did we actually need the Hamiltonicity here? Not really, right? This just holds true for any cycle, any even cycle. So take any even cycle, take a chord, then you have one such path, swap the colors there, merge them, and we have a valid color for the reduced graph. And yeah, that is the next lemma. That if you take, if suppose in G, there is a cycle which has a chord, then G satisfies this 3H coloring conjecture. And this is again another equivalent form of it, that if there is a cycle with one edge that is uniquely colored. For example, take this cycle, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and back. So this has this edge that is black colored and no other edge is black colored. And if we have such a cycle, then also we are done. And this actually uses this again. So for instance, you can just take the other red-green path from the other side and join it back, then that would form a cycle. So yeah, I hope this lemma is clear, because this lemma is something we will be using it heavily in what's going to follow. So, yeah, all right. Maybe let's just give half a minute for you to think about it and digest this lemma. Feel free to ask any questions if you have any. All right, let's move ahead to the next special case. So again, similar to the Hamiltonian case, let's say in addition to the conditions in the 3H coloring conjecture, that is cubic and cubic and 3H colorable thing. Suppose G is given to be planar as well. Then the statement in 3H coloring conjecture holds true. So the way we are going to prove this is that our first claim is that there is a face C with length at most 5, and we are going to prove this using all the theorems, or most of the theorems that we have proven so far, like this handshaking lemma, which implies 2m equal to 3n, twice the number of edges is equal to the degree sum, and each degree is 3. And then again, face comma edge double counting, and that would imply that 2m is equal to the summation of sizes of all faces. And suppose this were not to be true, then every face has size at least 6, and so this thing is greater than or equal to 6l. So these two together imply that 3n equal to 6l, that is n greater than or equal to 2l. Now if you plug it back into Euler's formula, then you get 2 equal to n minus m plus l. M is 3n by 2, f or l, anything that stays the same. And so this evaluates to f minus n by 2, which from this inequality is less than or equal to 0. Now we have got 2 is less than or equal to 0, which is a contradiction. So we have proven this, that there is a face with length at most 5. Now we'll be just be going over all the cases, like suppose the face is of size 3, suppose it's of size 4, and suppose it's of size 5, and so on. So yeah, moving ahead. So suppose it has a 3 cycle, or rather any general odd cycle. So it's clear that this cannot be colored using 2 colors. Because if it were to be colored using 2 colors, then this will be green, red, and this will be green again, and there will be some sort of conflict because of this oddness of this cycle. So this triangle must have all the 3 colors, which means that every color is present exactly once. And so just take any edge, and this edge is of course uniquely present. This color is uniquely present in the cycle, and so it satisfies this condition 2 of the lemma that you have seen. This one, this condition of there being there exists an edge which is uniquely colored. So when we have a triangle, then we are done. Suppose if we have a pentagon, then again it cannot be 2 colored because it's odd, and by pigeonhole principle, so there must be at least one color that is present exactly once, and let this be that color. And now this is a uniquely colored edge in this pentagon. So again, by the condition 2 of lemma 2, we are done. Right. Now, this sort of arguments doesn't really work for a fourth cycle, because yeah, even if there are 3 colors present in the fourth cycle, then we are done, of course, similar to this 5 cycle, because there would be an edge which is uniquely colored. But let's assume that this 4 cycle is just 2 colored, as in there is a red, there's a blue, there's a red, and there's a blue again. So now there is no uniquely colored cycle in this. So now what we are going to do is we are going to take this red green colored cycle that passes through this. And again, there could be 2 cases. Either this cycle intersects or passes through this edge, or it doesn't pass through. Right. Now here, let's take the first case that it doesn't pass through. Now, could you see that, yeah, we are done here as well. Let's wait for another 30 seconds. The arguments are again similar, very similar to what we have been doing so far. In 5 color theorem, in Hamiltonicity, in the lemma. Yeah. Anyway. So, all right. So, yeah, so what you're going to do is just swap the colors in this cycle. So red will go to here, like this will become green, this will become red, this green, this red, and so on, so on, so on. So this would actually become a green edge now. And now you can see that this 4 cycle has a uniquely colored edge, this green edge. And that is what I have written here as well. So just swap these colors, we'll get a uniquely colored edge, and we are done using the second condition of the lemma. All right, let's move to the next case. So in this case, so this cycle actually contains this edge as well. So the cycle goes something like this, contains this edge, and then comes back to the same vertex, this red-green cycle. So now again, I say that, yeah, we are visibly done. Can you see why? Let's think about this for another 30 seconds, maybe. All right. So as you'll be able to see here, suppose if we take this cycle as in, yeah, anyway, go ahead with the argument. Okay, fair. So yeah, so as you can see that this cycle, this red green part of the cycle, together with this blue edge, so this is a cycle which has this blue edge as this uniquely colored edge, right? So again, using the second condition of lemma 2, we are done. And we have covered all the cases, and this completes the proof for the planar special case. So any doubts in this or any questions in this so far? All right. So yeah, this is pretty much what I had. And this is just a brief summary of what we have done in this talk. So we have started with some basic definitions, and then we have seen this handshaking lemma where we used double counting. Then we saw this Menger's theorem, just the backward direction, and we used pigeonhole principle there. Then again we saw that theorem on triangulation, that is every planar graph has at most 3 and minus 6 vertices. And there again we use this face edge double counting. Then we saw the theorem on Eulerian tour, and there we use this proof by contradiction, as in we assume to the contrary something, and then we use some extremal arguments. We assumed a maximal walk and then contradicted it, that it cannot be maximal. Then we have seen some results in linear algebra. Not much of a proof technique there, because the techniques go back to linear algebra, but then the things that we have seen there is the cycle space and cut space. We have proved that cycle space and cut space are orthogonal to each other. They are orthogonal complements of each other. And then this dimension of cut space is n-1, which is basically the number of edges in a tree. And the dimension of cycle space is just m minus that. So yeah, and then we moved over this coloring. We dived into this coloring parts, and we proved the 5-color theorem, where we used induction. We assumed that every smaller graph has a 5 coloring, every smaller planar graph has a 5 coloring, and then we sort of lifted that coloring to this graph as well. So we use induction and then some caseworks there as well. And the special case just use a collection of these theorems as well as a lot of casework. So yeah, so like these proof techniques or ideas which we have used in this theorem, but these are also very, very popular and very common in other areas of graph theory and combinatorics in general. So in combinatorics, you generally have such very simple and beautiful proof ideas, some more which are not present here, like invariance and all. And other things is just about your logic and like your thinking about the system itself. For example, in the 5-color theorem, we use these things, but then thinking about that 2-colored subgraphs is something that has to come from your side. But yeah, in all other areas of combinatorics, we majorly use such simple proof techniques and some intuition on top of it. Yeah. And then, like at many points in the talk, you would have felt like when we waited for about 1 minute or half a minute for you to prove this thing. So you would have felt like, okay, this is getting hard to prove or something. And then the moment you hear the argument that, okay, yeah, this is the way we prove it. And you would have suddenly thought, oh shit, why didn't I think of this before? And yeah, if you had this feeling, then just get used to it, because this is a common feeling in the entirety of graph theory and combinatorics. The problems are really, really simple to understand. For example, this 4-color theorem itself, that every planar graph is 4 color. That's it, short and sweet, finished. But proving this is extremely hard. And then we have some other type of problems as well, which are again very, very easy to state. And then the moment you see the argument, or someone gives you a hint about the argument, but then you feel, okay, it's trivial. But then proving it from scratch, that takes a lot of effort. And I would say this is one of my main motivation to do combinatorics and graph theory. This feeling is something that I like a lot. And
it sounds a lot like sorry, just because it sounds a lot like NP essentially, right?
Yeah, P-naughty NP.
Yeah,
somewhat,
somewhat like that. Yeah.
Yeah, true that. In some more mathematical terms, but yeah, that is true. And yeah, so these are some more problems that you could think about after this talk. For example, this Brooks theorem, this delta G is the maximum degree. I would rather mention it here before submitting this PDF. And again, like this theorem that given any bipartite graph G, we haven't really defined bipartite, but it's fairly intuitive to guess what it is. And to prove that it is delta G edge colorable. And this is a particularly interesting one. So we proved in our talk that the fundamental cuts and fundamental cycles, these form a basis for cut space and cycle space respectively, right? But we actually took the easy way out. We just proved that they are linearly independent, and then we used the dimension, the sum of dimensions. But can you directly prove it that these fundamental cuts and cycles also span their respective cycle spaces and cut spaces? That would be an interesting thing to think about. And yeah, if you want to explore further into graph theory, then my personal favorite, Graph Theory by Rina Distel. Most of the talk is entirely contained in this. Then this is a book which is somewhat on the easier side, and this is a book that is somewhat on the tougher side than this book by Rina Distel. And if you wish to take some courses in IITB, then we have CS408 graph theory, we have MA5109 graph theory. This one is running this sem, so hurry up. And there are some more courses as well. Yeah. So yeah, with this I conclude this talk. Thanks for attending, and we'll be happy to take any questions.